to a birthday party and I get rejected because I'm autistic. Or there was one time where I was like in fourth grade, years
Uh,
later.
uh-huh.
I was going to go to one of my best friend's birthdays, and the
Hmm.
mom didn't let me in, and I thought it was perfectly acceptable.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines Nashville. Tonight's conversation is one that affects more people than we often realize, but we don't always talk about it with depth, honestly, or real understanding. Autism is not rare. It's not new, but the way we understand it is evolving rapidly. We're seeing more diagnosis, more awareness, and more conversations, but also more confusion, more assumptions, and sometimes more stigma. So tonight, we're not just talking about autism from the outside looking in. We're talking to someone who has lived it, studied it, and built a career around understanding it. My guest was diagnosed with autism at 5 years old, and he's now a registered behavior therapist who has dedicated his life to studying neurodiversity and how it shows up in everyday life, in relationships, and especially in the workplace. This is going to be an honest conversation about what autism really looks like and what people get wrong and how society can do better, not just in awareness, but in action. Jordan Brooks, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee. Glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Okay, we're gonna jump right in.
Sounds
Now,
good.
okay. Now I want to ask you something that may make people a little uncomfortable, but it's real. How many people do you think have been labeled as difficult, weird, or not a good fit when in actuality, they were just neurodivergent and unsupported? And also, what does it cost someone mentally, emotionally, and even financially when the world keeps mislabeling who they are?
That's a huge question to start with. So, in terms of how many people have been mislabeled like that, I don't think there's any exact number, but what I could say would be the majority of the time, and that's in relation to the fact that the neurodiversity as a movement has been around since the 90s. And then it's only really recently starting to become more wide scale and known. But even
Mhm.
then, it's mostly just kind of used as a buzzword.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people, and I think it's also based on other intersectionalities that you have, whether you're a woman, whether you have different genders, different sexualities, as well as different races, ethnicities, and any other kind of minority status.
Mhm.
And so if you take like African American children, for example, in schools,
Mhm.
a lot of them, I think the number is like 1 in 4 Black children are misdiagnosed as mild intellectual disability,
Mhm.
just so that they could be put into lower quality curricula that then
Mhm.
affects their future in life. A lot of when they're being called difficult
Mhm.
is that they are in contradiction or challenging a status quo that has been established and it's been around very much rooted in our society. And
Mhm.
that's seen in employment. So if I can give you even some statistics, some rough numbers, because again, we don't even have a full number of what would be the full neurodivergent population. But if you're looking at a rough estimate of the global population, we have about 10 to 20% of neurodivergence. And that's not even just autism, that's other neurotypes like ADHD,
Mhm.
OCD, dyslexia, and so forth. And within that percentage, 84% of that, which would be about 1.4 billion roughly, are unemployed.
Wow.
With the remaining 16%, or about 263 million, a mix of employed and underemployed. And underemployed
Mhm.
is when you're getting a job and it doesn't reflect your actual skill set.
Right.
While that's better than being unemployed, you still have a lot of mental health issues that are associated with that. And so that doesn't even begin to understand. This is one I want to look more into is even like the dropout rates, the
Yeah.
expulsion and suspension rates.
Hmm.
Even a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
work that I've seen, you're having kids get transferred to things like alternative schools, where maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's not a very good fit for them. And
Right.
there is the reality that when I was getting my special ed teaching license, we learned a lot about the student to prison pipeline. So that all comes from that mislabeling and misunderstanding and is really a design flaw. I think
Mm-hmm.
when you look at neurodiversity, it doesn't totally like reject what's called the medical model, which
Mm-hmm.
basically treats neurodivergence as a disease that needs to be fixed. It
Right.
does acknowledge that there are some things that can be seen as disabling factors. If you look at
Mm-hmm.
autism, a lot of what would essentially disable me would be executive functioning, high anxiety. On the
Right.
other hand, it still kind of leans on the other model of disability known as the social model, which says that it's society that disables people. And definitely,
Mm-hmm.
at the very least, says it's society's responsibility to support the people it disables. So if you kind of add to that, yes, there's this real even biological aspect that I have executive functioning issues, that I have anxiety, but it can also be worsened by the design of society and how much it's throwing information at me or how many stressors it's throwing at me that maybe we
Mm.
didn't have when we were living in the caves.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that would be one way to kind of do it. When you're thinking about the psychological aspects, then what you're really wanting to think about is masking. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes. What exactly is masking? I've heard you talk about it, but can you just break it down for us?
Yeah, let me first give a couple of definitions that would be helpful for the audience. So, roughly, and I'm paraphrasing this, if you're looking at neurodiversity, you're treating that as a biological fact that there is
Mm-hmm.
no one brain. There are
Mm.
multiple types of brains
Right.
based on how they're wired and how they work. And those
Mm-hmm.
different brain types are called neurotypes. Neurodivergence, or to be neurodivergent, is the understanding that there is a misconception that there is one brain or a normal brain, an ideal brain to have, which in and
Mm-hmm.
of itself is not very well defined, very
Mm-hmm.
arbitrary, and it's very much measured by a very unspecified and ever-changing standard of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody that diverges from that norm is considered neurodivergent. And so when you're also then talking about neurodiverse, technically when you have a group of people like that are autistic, ADHD, OCD, that's technically neurodiverse. But
Mm-hmm.
because they all diverge from the norm or neurotypical brain, they're still just all considered neurodivergent. When you have neurotypicals and neurodivergence in the same space, that's
Mm-hmm.
neurodiverse, if
Okay.
those terms kind of make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does this apply to masking?
Right.
That because there is this ideal brain, and because the neurotypical or normal brain is considered a social construct,
Mm-hmm.
that means that society is really going to be built on that social construct to privilege that social construct.
Hmm.
And so the way that you're going to get those privileges is that you have to essentially act normal, and
Mm.
that's masking. And a lot of
Right.
people be masking and not even realize that they're doing it. So you have a lot of people, if you're kind of going back to that mislabeling, there's also misdiagnosis.
Right.
There are people who could be people of color or women. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of the diagnostic tools that we have for autism alone are aimed at upper middle class white boys. So
Mm.
anybody that doesn't meet that standard is usually not considered autistic and therefore gets misdiagnosed.
Right.
I've met
Or
a lot
another
of
label. Yeah.
yeah, I've met a lot of women. A lot of my friends that are women, they've been self-diagnosed, or they
Mm.
started kind of figuring out that they have autism and they got re-diagnosed because they
Mm.
originally had something like a personality disorder or bipolar
Mm-hmm.
disorder. While there
Mm-hmm.
are some similarities to that to autism, and maybe they're even comorbid,
Mm-hmm.
which means you have more than one neurotype or one more than one disability, whichever terminology you want to use.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah.
so Jordan, what is masking and what are the perils of that?
Yeah.
How can it
So,
hurt?
right. So masking again in the simplest way that I can understand and put in layman's terms is you are behaving in a way that makes you look normal, that
Mm.
meets that standard.
Yeah.
That can range from the way you walk, the way you talk, eye
Mm-hmm.
contact. That's a big.
Mm-hmm.
But in the reality of it and why it has been proven in studies to be very harmful
Mm-hmm.
is your brain, if you're not considered normal, if you're neurodivergent, your brain is usually not wired to be like a neurotypical's.
Hmm.
So for some folks that are autistic, making eye contact hurts a lot.
Oh.
And so that can be like a sensory issue that they have. It can
Mm-hmm.
also just take a lot of focus that they have to keep remembering, oh gosh, I have to keep looking at your eyes and I can't
Mm-hmm.
really focus on the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're darting around and going like this, like I've had conversations with people who have talked about even the hiring process and they think, well, that looks suspicious. Why are they looking around like that? Even though it's
Wow.
like that's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. If you actually check for understanding, you probably see that they're fully paying attention to what you're saying.
Right.
They could give really good input.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way that masking is harmful is that it can disenfranchise you from getting opportunities just because you didn't make eye contact. The other part
Mm-hmm.
is that you're basically performing 24/7
Oh.
and you're not able to express who you are. You're not able to get a break. And depending on how your brain processes that information, that's really, really straining. And that tends to
Mm-hmm.
lead, particularly within an autistic context, to what would be called a meltdown or burnout. You either have a meltdown where you're just frustrated, you can't take it anymore, and your fight or flight is activated. And then the other case is that you manage to successfully mask, and it's getting you those short-term benefits of being able to fit in, but in the long run, it has strained your brain so much that then you start getting frequent burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through that burnout, and it's very, very hard to get out of it. It puts you through
Oh.
like a whole layer of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the worst case scenarios, you start even having suicide thoughts because people are learning learned helplessness and learned hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very tiring to keep going through that process. I found that like in my early 20s, I
Mm-hmm.
could take on a lot of things. I had a lot of resilience, but as I get older, it's just harder to do it. I get more and more tired.
Oh.
So when you're going through that every single day,
Mm-hmm.
every single second of your day, and a lot of how you're learning masking is that you learn the consequences of being found out and the
Mm.
humiliation and disenfranchisement that comes from
Mm.
that gives you a lot of trauma.
Mm.
So then there's a fear factor that's involved if you can't mask. You're
Right.
basically exposed and caught. So there's a lot of
Oh.
things kind of going on. I hope that answered your
Yeah, it
question. A
does.
lot of
That's
dimensions to it.
unsustainable. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. Now, that leads me to my next question. What
Yeah.
is something about autism that you experience internally that people on the outside would never notice?
So every single day, my brain is just constantly racing.
Mm.
So I have a mixture of different flashbacks that I face from traumatic instances I've had, and that keeps me on guard all the time.
Oh.
The other part is that I even have this is called internalized ableism.
Hmm.
So whether I'm at work, whether I'm in the school setting, when I'm even around people that I trust and have been nothing but good to me,
Right.
I have a perception where I think that everybody hates me.
Mm.
And I know consciously that's ridiculous. But there's a part of me that's almost in subconsciously in disbelief. And it's almost kind of like, I trust you, but I also trust that at any moment I could be stabbed in the back,
Mm.
or I could be found out or misperceived. And
Right.
it's kind of odd to try to handle that balance. That in some
Right.
cases you can be surrounded by people, but on the other hand, you also kind of feel lonely and not totally
Mm.
understood. So
Hmm.
it's this very weird balance where you do find people where you have these great moments and these really nice heart to hearts where it's like, yeah, you get me, this is awesome, this is great. But then there's kind of this instinct to keep returning to this sort of paranoid,
Yeah.
protective view of me.
Mm.
So I think a lot of people will look at me and they'll see that I'm very happy. And, that's not totally masking. I am. The kindness I try to show to people is genuine.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of things that I won't really tell people. Um, because I think it would be difficult for people to understand, and it's even difficult
Hmm.
for me to fully understand. Does that kind of
Right.
answer your question, or were you
That
kind of thinking
does.
of something
No,
else?
no, it really does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say to a parent of a child recently diagnosed with autism?
Mhm.
One, a school age child. What can they do to protect their child, to prepare their child, to
Yeah.
advocate for their child?
So, yeah, it's a very difficult slope. And I think about my parents because, like you said, I was diagnosed between age 5 and age 6,
Hmm.
like in 2001 or 2002.
Hmm.
And this is very much when you're having the war against autism policy in the US. Get rid of autism, cure autism. Neurodiversity movement was starting to spring up,
Hmm.
but again, it wasn't really talked about. I didn't hear about neurodiversity until I got my master's, and that was like in my late 20s. That was chance.
Yeah.
And so, um, for them, they're having to grow up really being influenced by the medical model. They're listening to experts, they're reading the latest research at the time, and a lot
Hmm.
of it is saying, well, your child's developmentally behind here because autism is, within that context, considered a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Hmm.
And so they're having to kind of deal with these different false perceptions and trying to navigate this difficult boat because they basically diagnose you with a highly stigmatizing label and don't tell you what it is.
Hmm.
So you're having to kind of figure it out on your own.
Right.
So what I would say is your big first step is understand that autistic people every single day contradict the stereotype, whether they are
Hmm.
considered nonverbal or not. You will find that there are people that don't vocalize, but they speak in other ways through like AAC devices, sign
Okay.
language. And so I've like found some that are like doctoral students, ones that are working to become medical doctors, and they advocate every day. There are
Awesome.
some that I don't know too much about it, so I'm not going to say too much on it, but they basically have a kind of comorbidity that's both autism and another type of neurotype that makes it so that they can't really control their body and that makes it difficult for them to speak, but they found ways to communicate
Hmm.
that. And you basically see that, oh yeah, no, they completely understand what's going on. They
Hmm.
completely comprehend everything around them.
Hmm.
So what that means is that you have a very rich community of all different types of autistic experiences.
Right.
And those are the people you should go to. You should try to listen to those lived experiences.
Hmm.
Because then when you're inevitably going to have to deal with the medical system,
Hmm.
you may find that there are doctors, behavior analysts, and teachers that are very much up to date. They're listening to it, but a lot of times you may find that there are people who are not. And they
Hmm.
aren't necessarily evil. They don't mean bad by you. But
Right.
they're still living within the understanding that autism is a disease and it's something that is flawed and needs to be cured.
Hmm.
So, like a great example would be probably a big pressure that they would face is in my own field, applied behavior analysis, dark
Hmm.
history of autism. If you're looking at like Ivar Lovaas and Reckers and the Feminine Boy Project, where
Hmm.
they're even using like ABA to do conversion therapy on
Hmm.
homosexual children or LGBTQ in general, then
Hmm.
mixing that with electric shock therapy on autistic children, with Lovaas literally viewing autistic people as essentially hollowed out husks that need their
Hmm.
personalities to be rebuilt, very much embedded still to this day in our field. And there are some behavior analysts that will listen to the criticisms that are rightfully lambasted towards our or flung at our I'm using the wrong terminology here. I want
Hmm.
to be
Hmm.
respectful. I'm trying it's like very, very legitimate criticism
Hmm.
being directed at ABA.
Hmm.
And but there's a lot more apparently that just won't listen. And
Hmm.
you'll see similarities when it comes to special ed, so on and so forth. So
Hmm.
to answer this question in the mumbo jumbo that I'm giving out here, because I couldn't find the
Hmm.
correct words,
That's okay.
um, for parents, I would say go to the actual source and understand that autistic people are people and they can comprehend and explain their situation, and you should assume competence. So you'll talk to the community members that you can find online, that you can
Hmm.
find at conferences.
Hmm.
Um, it's becoming a lot more accessible to find neurodivergent advisors and get their views and even read their materials in their books. Some
Hmm.
of them even
Hmm.
blog. Read about those. So that when you're having the point, like in the case of ABA, a lot of it's going to be this is supported and pushed by your insurance. So you may have a kid that has very high support needs, and
Hmm.
ABA may be your best choice, but you can still say, hey, hold on. When we're coming up with these different goals, is this neurodivergent affirming? What are we targeting here? Oh, we're targeting his
Hmm.
hand flapping? No, that's not fine. Autistic people explained to me that when they hand flap, that's a way to regulate their emotions. So
Hmm.
you're taking away a vital need of theirs
Hmm.
versus the self-stim that's based on them puncturing their eye. Okay, we should target that. That's self-harm,
Right.
if that makes sense what I'm saying. You're able to kind
Hmm.
of have more of that information to be able to, one, empower yourself to truly
Hmm.
advocate for your child, and then hopefully model that advocacy to your child so they can self-advocate.
Right.
And then on
Right.
top of that, if you can establish communication with your child, talk to them.
Yeah.
Constantly do what's called arranging assent. A
Hmm.
child, unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, and for even legitimate reasons, is deemed not fully competent to make decisions themselves. So the parent and teachers are basically left as the ones that give consent. So what
Right.
your team should
That's
be to
assent.
do, right? And
Hmm.
so assent is just at least seeing, do they agree? Does the
Hmm.
child or the individual that is not allowed to give consent, do they agree to what's going
Hmm.
to happen to them?
Hmm.
What's going to be done with them, which means you really need to take more of a collaborative approach, not
Makes
a
sense.
coercive approach.
Okay. Now, Jordan, people often talk about high functioning versus low functioning. Do you
Yeah.
think those labels help or hurt?
I'm going to lean on hurt. It's
Mm,
still a lot that I'm kind of learning about. But so, for example, for me, I was diagnosed with mild high functioning autism with intelligence. So
mm,
that kind of goes to show the level of stigma around that. But
mm.
it's interesting because I carried that as an identity, as part of my identity for a long time, because that's all I knew.
Right.
I started to kind of have the first reality shock when I went to a conference and I got to hear other autistics speak and say, yeah, it's apparently problematic to be called that. And when
Mm,
I was kind of looking at it, I mean, if you look at autistic history,
mhm.
very, very dark history, and you would pretty much will learn that autism and our understanding of it partly comes from the context of genocide, because a lot of it, there's a part of it that was where our understanding of autism was being done here.
Mm,
But there was a whole other part of it being done in Nazi occupied Austria.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so a great book, if anybody wants to read it, would be Asperger's Children.
mm.
So that kind of talks about where you had Hans Asperger, which is what
Yeah.
Asperger syndrome is based on.
Mhm.
And he basically developed the autistic range, which is kind of the precursor to the autism spectrum.
Got it.
And part of how, in the basic gist of it, of how he would use this range was to consider those that were able to basically have enough high functioning traits to be able to have a chance of being converted into what was called the Volk. And the Volk was basically the Nazi community. They could prove their functionality and usefulness there. Whereas the
Mm.
ones that weren't able to prove that, usually deemed low functioning, were sent to places like Spiegelgrund or T4, that where they were pretty much going to be tortured and killed.
Oh,
So there's that dark, dark historical
yeah.
undertone that goes with it. And I can't say they necessarily call it high functioning or low functioning there, but that is a massive part of how we describe the spectrum, is that you have autistics on this end and you have autistics on this end. But it is heavily debated. Like Asperger's syndrome itself is, I think, facing some stigma, but there are others that
Mhm,
have had that all their lives and are pushing back and saying no. So I think when it comes to that, you want to see what the autistic individual themselves thinks and kind of
mhm,
go with that, but just be mindful of those historical undertones and kind of the misconceptions that creates. I think now with the DSM-5, they have type 1, type 2, and type 3 autism to really tell you the level of supports, which is why you'll generally hear me say low support needs versus high support needs. And I like
mm.
that more because it doesn't assume that you can't function well,
Right.
just says that the way that your brain processes information, how you respond to stimuli in your environment, may require this level of support.
Mm. Makes
But even then,
sense.
when you're thinking of low support needs and high support needs, there's still misconceptions there. For
Mhm.
example, people like me who are deemed to have low support needs, we're basically sent out of high school and deemed, oh yeah, they don't need support, they're good, even though no, we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, we need help with independent living. We may need help with employment.
Mm-hmm.
You'll actually
Mm-hmm.
find the ones with high support needs actually tend to have a better shot at getting employment because they get those extra supports.
Exactly.
So it's,
Exactly.
I'm sorry I can't give you a straight answer. It's just
No.
very, very tricky, and I hope that kind of conveys the complexity or the nuances of the
It
autistic landscape,
It
by
does. It
extension, the
does.
neurodivergent landscape.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, what would a society that truly understands and supports neurodivergent people actually look like?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's something I'm honestly still trying to figure out what it looks like, but
Hmm.
I think we're starting to see signs of what that looks like with the new push. Well, it might not even be a new push. It's been a push
Uh-huh.
called neuroinclusion. That's within the neurodiversity at work movement, where they
Hmm.
kind of study neurodiversity or neurodivergence within the workplace.
Hmm.
And so ideally what you would have is employers that educate themselves and get the advice of like neurodivergent advisory boards,
Hmm.
and they recreate and reshape the entire workplace design
Hmm.
to basically giving options of how you do it. So like for example, in one way you would have the interview process. You change the traditional interview process. A lot of what stops neurodivergence from getting a job is that they can't get through the interview process because it's
Right.
more of a social ritual. Can you maintain
Hmm.
eye contact?
Right.
I've seen it in trainings where they're like, "Oh yeah, use these hand signals to make you look like you're more sophisticated," which to me, I'm like, to be frank, why would I give a shit?
Right.
Like, if I'm an employer, I don't care if you can make eye contact or if you can make hand signals. I just want to know if you can do the job.
Exactly.
And so, what interviews should be and what society should be is a value of people's strengths.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, if you're going to do the interview process, you may do it in a variety of ways. I've seen it where Microsoft has literally done interviews in Minecraft. I've been part of studies where they're looking at ways to do it in augmented reality and virtual reality.
Oh,
Really cool stuff that
yeah.
makes it easier for the autistic individual to not have to make eye contact, to not have to
Hmm.
worry about facial expressions or
Hmm.
worry too much about masking. And you can actually focus on the task at hand, which is what do you know how to do? In the
Exactly.
Minecraft activities, they show, okay, can you work together as a team? Cool.
Hmm.
Working
Hmm.
together as a team. We're solving problems and puzzles. Some have done workshops where they bring
Hmm.
them in and they hire some of them. The ones that didn't get hired, they give them feedback and they give them another chance later on when hiring opens up again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so a lot of it
That's
is valuing the
awesome.
strengths, challenging that status quo, and taking a very collaborative approach.
Hmm.
And one thing I would even say is just kind of getting rid of this fetishizing of neurodivergence. A lot of it, particularly in autism, and I'm going to tread carefully on this because I've met autistic individuals that like to view themselves this way. But
Hmm.
talking
Hmm.
about autistic superpowers. So a lot of like the different shows I've watched, I get really annoyed. I can't watch them for very long.
Right. There are a few of them out right now.
Hmm.
One is with the doctor.
Yep.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and so like, a lot of it is like it's it's disturbing in a way because it's showing that they somehow have these like insane superpowers, like they have an ability to see things in a different way, or they're able to um just do incredible things that make them look extraordinary.
Hmm.
And yes, there are definitely autistic individuals that have those abilities, but I think the vast majority of us are like me who are looking at ourselves and wondering, where are my superpowers? I don't have that.
Right. Where do I
And
fit
so,
in? Yeah.
right. And so it's like, A, you wonder, who is this for? Because it's not for me.
Hmm.
And then B, these are not the things that I need to be learning about.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think a lot of what you want to kind of see is having discussions and a recognition of the different survival traits that neurodivergents have, not so much the heroic traits.
Right.
And the other part that's even kind of that bothers me about even this kind of fetishization is that it's still kind of following those, again, Nazi historical undertones of they are having these superpowers because they benefit our society
Hmm.
instead of redesigning society to include.
Wow. That's
So that's the concern I have. And I think in an ideal world, you're reshaping all of society to really not even just be able to accommodate and really include and to also value neurodivergence, but every
hmm.
minority group.
Hmm.
I think you'll find that there's a lot of similarities that different minority groups face.
Hmm. Now, Jordan, when I look at you and when I think about you, and you have a twin brother,
Yeah.
and I think you said that he is on the spectrum, did you not?
No, I have some speculations that he might. But
Okay.
he was never officially diagnosed. He has obsessive compulsive disorder because that runs
Oh,
in my mom's side of the family. Yeah.
I get it.
Sorry, I don't mean to be
Okay.
a stick in the mud. I'm just
Oh
making that
no, no,
clear.
thank you. I need it. I need it. So, when I look at you and your brother, you guys are pretty successful. Your brother is an attorney.
Yep.
You went to Vanderbilt and I think you graduated what with a 3.98 or something like that.
Yeah, like
So
a 3.9 GPA.
yeah, so you guys, I think you guys are a perfect example of how, you know, people who are neurodivergent, they can get in, there's a place for them in this world.
Yeah,
So when you think about that, and I know that you told me that your mom was a huge advocate for you in the school system.
absolutely.
When you think about your experience as a student, what was the one most important thing that your mom did that really made a difference, during your school age years?
I think my mom is a massive critical thinker, and she
Mm,
always taught me to question, which I think has heavily, heavily benefited me in life.
mm,
And so while she's been influenced by some of the different practices I've talked about from experts talking about this about autism, that about autism. A lot of that is
mm,
coming from we didn't know what autism was.
mm, mm,
But even then she could still see my humanity and she still loved me as her son.
mhm,
That she could say, okay, like for example, I think it was my grandmother will always bring this up and laugh at this person. I think it was
mhm,
either a psychiatrist or a psychologist that they brought me to when I was a kid.
mhm.
The guy told my mom that I would be very cold and I would never love, to which she just said that's complete bullshit. So,
Oh,
so she's
wow.
still, the biggest thing about her is that she was always thinking about and always recognizing my different strengths.
Yeah.
She'd say, nope, that's not true. This is what
Hmm.
we do. And so when it especially came to the school system, I think
Hmm.
they wanted to put me in a separate special education classroom.
Hmm.
And she checked it out. She looked at it, but what she saw at my elementary school were, I mean, all the kids were just kept in these bungalows that were very run down,
Mm.
had no air conditioning,
Hmm.
it's poorly maintained. And then she's
Hmm.
looking at the office and it has donuts everywhere and
Hmm.
decorations. Looks nice. She's like, oh, so
Separate
this
and
is where,
unequal, right?
yeah, exactly. So this is where my taxpayer money's going. So she fought very, very hard during what would be called for the audience here the IEP process. That
Hmm.
is the Individual Education Program that is designated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or
Hmm.
IDEA,
Hmm.
or the recognized disabilities under that law, to get you specialized and individualized supports to put you in what's called the least restrictive environment to provide you with a
Hmm.
fair, appropriate education. And so, um, the way that they, or fair, appropriate public education, that's called
Right,
FAPE.
right, right.
So she fought very hard for that, and she
Hmm.
managed to get me into the general ed setting. And that's great when you're looking at different studies because you're putting a child into a communication rich environment and they're able
Hmm.
to be more exposed to that and try out their skills more.
Hmm.
And it was very appropriate for me as well because she saw that I could get along with other kids. I can control my behaviors very well, and I didn't need a lot of these extra supports.
Hmm.
I'm going to say, from even looking back here in retrospect, I don't even know if those poor kids were getting the proper supports that they needed, if they were even
Oh,
put into the appropriate area.
wow.
So she saved me from that, and she
Hmm.
also made sure that I had a one-on-one support that would help me through different things and help me stay on track. That really helped me eventually become independent by the time I was in eighth grade.
Awesome, awesome.
So that played a crucial role, and it, again, it's like that's also how I met a lot of my friends that I still have to this day.
Hmm.
And it gave me the base knowledge that I needed to be able to not only get into college, but to not only survive in college, but even
Hmm.
thrive.
Oh, you did. You did. You thrived, bro.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention.
Sure.
How does race impact autism diagnosis and treatment. I know we briefly touched on it earlier, but let's get into it.
Yeah, so I can't give you like exact statistics, and it's still an
Hmm.
area that I'm trying to learn about, and one I'm going to tread carefully on because I don't have that lived experience.
Okay.
But I think it's what you want to really think about is what's called intersectionality.
Hmm.
So you have, it basically means you have multiple experiences. In this case, it could be autism, but you're also Black. And they each have their own historical undertones that are now mixing together to create a unique
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that has its own cases. So, um, a Black autistic individual could go into any kind of counter space for Black people and still face ableism. Likewise, they can go into a neurodivergent space and face racism.
Oh, one second. What is ableism for our
Able.
viewers?
Yeah, so ableism is a very tricky term because it can kind of mix with things like disableism, but it's basically where it's disenfranchisement to people deemed less able than a standard to the benefit of
Mm.
those that meet that standard.
Mm.
So if somebody is deemed normal, the discrimination, disenfranchisement of those not deemed normal privileges the normal. And
Mhm.
that could come in three forms. So there's institutional ableism. So the way our laws and policies, even our building designs, will disable other people for the benefit of those that it's built for. So if
Mm.
you're looking at, say, like either a library or some kind of institution where you have to go to work,
Mhm.
if it's just stairs, the person in the wheelchair has no way to get into that building. The building
Exactly.
itself disables that individual.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's institutional ableism.
Mhm.
When it comes to different policies in a workplace that's not reflective of the actual realities that a neurodivergent faces when it comes to them processing information or
Mhm.
creating a workspace that's very loud or has sensory or causes sensory overload. Maybe that benefits the ones that don't have those issues,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it absolutely disables the person that can't handle that. And
Oh.
not having any kind of safe space or any option to get away from that would be institutional ableism. Interpersonal ableism is how people may discriminate disabled people or disable other people. And that can come off as unintentional.
Mhm.
They accidentally did something that disenfranchised or alienated a disabled individual, or they're straight up just like bullying and discriminating them in what's called like flat out disableism.
Mm.
And then there's internalized ableism. So
Mhm.
each one of these things you're going through, they're giving you messages of where you belong in society, and you keep that contained in yourself.
Mhm.
So if you're saying like a lot of it, for example, I've had, it's usually always birthdays for autistic people.
Mhm.
Usually a lot of times I've read countless stories and even gone through experiences myself where I've gone to a birthday party and I get rejected because I'm autistic.
What do you mean?
They just flat out won't let me in because I'm
Oh.
autistic.
Mm.
Yeah, and so it's initially it hurt when I was really young. But then
Yeah.
I remember there was one time where I was like in fourth grade, years
Uh,
later.
uh-huh.
I was going to go to one of my best friend's birthdays, and the
Mhm.
mom didn't let me in, and I thought it was perfectly acceptable. I internalized it.
Oh.
So when you're even thinking about like when you're looking at autistic people and how angry they are when they start developing kind of that self-actualization or self-awareness
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
understanding, that's
Mhm.
coming from unpacking years and years,
Mhm.
decades even of
Mhm.
trauma that
Mhm.
has been going on constantly. So when you're thinking about that in race, you're having those historical undertones where you're having, I mean, racism is probably going to be in the same way. Institutional racism, interpersonal
Yeah.
racism, internalized
Mhm.
racism, you're
Mhm.
facing that. When you're even thinking about it in the diagnosis aspect, like we said, the diagnostic tools, they reflect a bias.
Yeah.
And that
Yep.
bias is towards the privileging of we're going to detect and support upper middle
Mhm.
class white males.
Mhm.
But anybody that doesn't meet that standard is not going to get anything. And also just recognizing that different groups have more stigma than the other. So you may find that, yeah, maybe there's a lower socioeconomic status, white male maybe has more of a chance of getting diagnosed and more of an accurate diagnosis versus, say, a black autistic
Mm-hmm.
male or black autistic female
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or non-binary and so forth. So those
Mm-hmm.
different intersectionalities have their own historical undertones that are going to affect the diagnosis process.
Right.
And it may not even be that the person doing the diagnosis is meaning to do it. They're just working with what they've been trained to use.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
kind
Those.
to kind of create a parallel, like that's even the issue with standardized testing. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
those tests have bias,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
it
yeah.
blocks opportunities for different groups
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's one way that it goes, and that's how you get a lot of folks that have either never been diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
Because then another aspect that I've even heard of is even just community attitudes towards disability. Some
Mm-hmm.
communities I've heard they'll say like, "Oh no, he's not autistic. That's just so and so."
Right.
Not really talking
Right.
about it. And while in some cases that seems endearing, it's like, yeah, we're not going to stigmatize this person. At the same time, it's a double-edged sword because diagnosis can also help you understand, oh yeah, this is why I do the things I do.
Exactly.
One of the things I do.
And it offers support, There's a support system once, you are diagnosed. But I do know that typically in the Black community, especially historically, we've
Hmm.
never really reached out to get our children diagnosed. Just like you
Yeah.
said, we dismiss the characteristics and the traits as, oh, that's just,
Yeah.
he's just a little touch or he's okay.
And to be
But in
fair,
action,
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
no,
Dee.
no, you go ahead.
I just wanted to add to it and to also be fair, like some of it comes from a legitimate fear of, oh, they're going to be treated differently
Mhm.
or that's going to get them more disenfranchised. What they have right now is good. We may lose more.
Wow.
I just wanted to
Wow.
add that. That's some
Yeah,
things
and
I've
that's
heard too.
yeah, and that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Jordan, for parents who are listening and maybe seeing signs in their child, what
Mhm.
would you want them to know right now? I know we're a little all over the place, but
Well, that's okay.
this conversation is just so engaging, and I'm just constantly thinking of different questions.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. I love this. Yeah, so I think kind of touching on, and I think this is a good way to even summarize everything we've discussed. It's just understanding that autism, there's a lot of stigma around it and there's a lot of misconceptions.
Mm,
And to be
mm,
ready for a pretty confusing and bumpy ride where I
mm.
hate to say it, you're probably going to have to be doing a lot of advocating and fighting.
Yeah, yeah.
But to understand that, you now have a lot more access to a bustling and ever-growing community
Mm-hmm,
of people who also are autistic.
mm-hmm,
And some of them are researchers, some of them are medical professionals, some of them are educators,
hmm.
and they're changing the world.
Yeah,
And they can
that's awesome.
provide you with that information. They openly want to support you. I believe there is the Autism Self-Advocacy Network that came from some of the earliest members of the autism rights movement that would later on be referred to as the neurodiversity movement. And
Mm,
that's still very much going on, and they can provide you with resources and information.
hmm.
If you're going to look at Autism Speaks, which is not very much liked by the autism community for legitimate reasons,
Mm,
they do, however, provide pretty good resources. Just
hmm.
tread carefully with that.
Okay.
So that would be another bit of advice I would give. And the other big thing is listen to your child. Don't just
Mm,
listen to your child, hear your child.
mm,
Assume that they have competency. And if you're
hmm.
not finding the competency, it's just because you need to find another way to communicate with them.
Hmm.
If I can provide one way that ABA can even give back to the autism community, it's to understand that your behavior happens for a reason, that there's a function for it and that it's logical. So if they're behaving a certain way, even if it's like this big blow up,
Yeah.
there is a reason it's happening and
Hmm.
they're trying to communicate something to you.
Wow.
Stimming can be the case where they're just trying to relax, but stimming can also show signs of distress. That
Now,
could
what is
be
stemming?
so stimming refers to self-stimming. Thank you for the clarifying question. So that's you'll usually see it's like any kind of body movement that you do
Mm-hmm.
that helps you relax.
Right.
So
Hmm.
the classic one that you see would be hand flapping. I
Oh.
do a vocal one that's like this. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how I do it, but yeah. And that develops
Hmm.
over time. You'll see that stims change. Some of them can
Hmm.
be harmful. where they're like
Hmm.
hurting themselves. The
Yeah.
difficult part is that if you're trying to address that and you're trying to change it, it's tricky because it is sensory. It's fulfilling some kind of need.
Right.
And that's not very easy to replace. Behavior is something
Hmm.
that you can never get rid of. You can either have it sustained or you can replace it with something else that's equally reinforcing.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
something to kind of keep in mind too. And that's where you could face some challenges if you're trying to
Hmm.
face, again, some of those more harmful behaviors, whether it's self-injury, physical aggression, or the sensory self-stimming that can be self-injurious. But in
Okay.
other cases where they're just like biting and it's not a sensory thing or even physical aggression, at the
Hmm.
same time, they could be communicating something that's going on in their environment that's saying, hey, I don't like this. I don't like this.
Hmm.
And that can give you guidance. And again, it doesn't mean that you let them keep doing it, but you can at least kind of find an entry point of, okay, how can I create a situation where we can communicate with each other?
Right.
And I
And
can
finally get
give
to the
my
root.
child the
Yeah.
tool. I can give my
Hmm.
child the tools and skills to be able to do this without getting them in trouble, and without other people getting hurt, and without themselves getting hurt.
Hmm.
And it's even more effective than the behavior that they're using right now.
Exactly.
And so the final
So,
thing I would even say is like,
mhm,
you definitely are like the guardian of them. You're definitely here to support them in the best way you can. But part of that
mhm,
support can also come from modeling self-advocacy,
mhm,
collaborating with them, and
mhm,
really understanding that they know their experience is the best too, but maybe they don't have the tools yet to explain it. And that's
mm.
something that you can do to help them. And that's where, again, it's important to go and talk to other members of the community. And
Right.
sorry to
Okay.
interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. So, Jordan, for someone who suspects that they themselves may be on the spectrum, but they've never been diagnosed, what
Mhm.
steps should they take?
Yeah, that's a tough one too. So I'll
Hmm.
sound like a broken record, but a lot of it comes down to get connected with the community that you think you're part
Yeah.
of
Hmm.
and try to
Hmm.
learn from them. And so that can either be that you're going to read about the lived experiences that they have, or
Hmm.
you're going to actually go to some of those community spaces and interact with them. And so I think that again is where you would go to the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. I think they provide some of those resources and people that you can talk to that can help you through that process.
Hmm.
There are a lot of women, especially, that are self-diagnosing
Wow.
because they'd been misdiagnosed all throughout their lives. I've read
Right.
stories of like mothers that were seeing that their children were going through similar things that they went through, and they get diagnosed the same day with their children, all having autism. Because, yeah,
Well,
now the
well,
tools are starting to change. We're getting better at diagnosing them, which is why you're seeing such an uptick in the autistic population.
mhm. And what do those tests look like? Are
Well,
they?
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Jordan. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, no. I interrupted you.
Now, I was
Um,
just wondering, what does the testing process look like? Is it pretty robust? Is it a long process?
it can be a pretty long process.
Hmm.
That's a part that I don't fully know about
Hmm.
because when it happened to me, I was very young. I did, however, get to partake in a study that got me to kind of see what it looked like, and it's very strange. A big part of it and why it's so hard for people that are suspecting that they may have autism or they may have some other form of neurodiversity is that in
Hmm.
autism alone, a lot of those tests are aimed at children. So
Oh,
there's like little to no
hmm.
tests that are even designed for adults.
Hmm.
So like even when I was in this test, they had me like look at a book that had no words in it. It was just illustrations. And it was like the weirdest book ever because it got to like one point where frogs just started floating up in the air and they're flying through like a town and all that. And it sounds weird, but I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to see, can I read people's expressions? Can
Right.
I infer and read situations?
Hmm.
And
A,
so
a
on and
lot
so
of,
forth.
mhm. I've heard that a lot of autistic people, they can't read expressions and, just things of that sort.
Yeah. Again, these
Mm-hmm.
are like some of the parts that I don't know fully about. I think there are
Mm-hmm.
autistic people that read expressions differently and they respond to it differently, or they
Mm.
can read it, they just don't know how to respond.
Oh,
Or
that's a good
assume that
point.
they can't read it because of just their facial expressions and how they look. So it
Right.
actually leads to an issue of what's called double empathy. Maybe there's a situation where not only the neurodivergent doesn't understand the neurotypical, but the neurotypical doesn't understand the neurodivergent.
Makes sense.
So
Wow.
there could be those ideas, and there are some people that just legitimately, yeah, I can't read expressions.
Mm,
There are
mm,
some autistics that struggle with texting and find
mm,
emojis to kind of be a godsend because
mm.
they rely on reading your facial expression to kind of read, engage. Okay, did I offend that person? Did I do anything? Oh no, now I gotta
Oh,
wait for the text to come in. Oh man, did I mess it up? Did I mess it up? I probably messed it up. That kind of
oh.
internalized ableism
Mhm.
is playing in as well. So I know that was kind of like a fully loaded question, but
Mhm.
yeah, I would say like I can't give you an exact number of it, and I could say, but I can say that it's very nuanced and it can take different forms.
Makes sense. Okay. So, Jordan, here's my last question.
Sure.
If you could leave people with one truth about autism that you wish everyone understood, what would it be?
So I think for me personally, this is a big question I'm still trying to find an answer
Hmm.
to. But I usually kind of answer this type of question with a story, and it's not a happy story. But if you're really looking at the research I do and what really speaks to me, I look at neurodivergent history,
Hmm.
a lot of that darkness. And so, particularly, I remember when I was reading Asperger's Children that they were talking about some of the kids that were sent to those institutions where they were more or less not going to make it. And particularly
Hmm.
talking from the perspective of the survivors that reported
Hmm.
what they went through. And it came to a point where they were basically undergoing so much torture and violence that they had undergone what's called habituation, where basically just going through that so much has no effect on them anymore. And it actually got to a point that whenever the Nazis would try to beat them, they would just smile and laugh at them and
Wow.
want more of it. And the
Hmm.
reason that story really speaks to me and what this has to do with answering this question is that when you're looking at that, you're not looking at any heroes. You're not looking at
Hmm.
anybody with superpowers. You're
Hmm.
looking at something that's very, very human.
Hmm.
You're looking at human beings that are being put into a terrible situation because a bunch of people just decided to put a label on them.
Hmm. Wow.
So that's autism's origins. But what you see from these people when they're smiling at the Nazis, when they're laughing at them, are thinking people,
Hmm.
people that believe in a level of justice, that are not even interested in surviving anymore. They're just interested in fighting back. And many of those survivors afterwards did go after their oppressors and brought them to
Hmm.
justice.
Oh,
It took them a
good.
long, long time,
Hmm.
but they did it. But unfortunately, that became forgotten. And what we have today is just talk about a disease or talk
Hmm.
about people that are seen as incompetent.
Hmm.
Or if they are viewed in any kind of light, it's just how they can benefit society. There's no humanity to the spectrum.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I could end this by simply saying just understand autistic people are human, but I think the story speaks volumes because it's showing that we're in an age now where autism was really written by people who are not autistic, and now the pen is being taken from them and brought back to the autistic people who are working with what they have, something that was forced on them. When I got diagnosed, I didn't consent to that diagnosis. That was forced on me,
Hmm.
and I lost my name because of it.
Hmm.
Yes, people call me Jordan, but I know in the back of their minds they just see the autism label. And that's something I have to live with every time I decide to take off my mask and tell them I'm autistic.
Right.
What I do instead is I try to rewrite that story. And so I would say right now you're having a lot of new writers and you're having a new page, a new chapter that's being turned in the autism story.
Hmm.
And it's being written by the legitimate writers. And those are
Right.
the ones you should read about. So I don't know if
Hmm.
that answers your question, but that's the best answer I can give at this moment.
I want to thank you for your candor. I think you are incredibly brave. You've advocated for yourself. You've really, you've went in the trenches and you've learned, you've researched and you've really, I think you're making a difference today, not only for yourself, but for others who are coming behind you. So I want to thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Didi.
so
I
much. And
appreciate
thank
it.
you for coming on the show. Okay.
Yeah.
So, tonight's conversation reminds us of something important. Autism isn't something out there that affects a small group of people. It's part of our families, our workplaces, our schools, and our communities. And the real issue isn't just awareness, it's understanding, understanding how people think, how they process the world, and how often we've misread behaviors instead of taking the time to truly see the person. We've all probably crossed paths with someone who was misunderstood. The question is, did we take a moment to understand them, or did we just label them and move on? As we leave this conversation, I want you to think about that because creating a more inclusive world isn't just about policies or programs. It's about everyday interactions, everyday awareness, and everyday choices. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Jordan, for coming on the show. I mean, I just think you are truly amazing, and what you're doing and what you've done. So thank you, everyone who's tuned in, okay? And we will see you next time.